hope I find that mist.
You know, you've been watching a Scooby-Doo cartoon, and it's amazing to me to see what's being brought forth in a cartoon. We've seen spell books, occultic amulets, we saw a crystal ball, astral projection to the evil zone.
Huh. All that and no mention of the true evil of that series. Scrappy-Doo. So much for credibility. Hey everybody, LioConvoy here. As promised, we're starting with the Deception of a Generation properly with their coverage of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Let me introduce you to the players here. This is Gary Greenwald. He produces and operates the program known as The Eagle's Nest. Insert Nazi joke here, and from what I've been told, he has a porn star mustache. With that, I think we've covered all the jokes concerning this person and program, so I hopefully won't have to look at them in the comments. Apparently, he still operates as a sort of faith healer in California. His biggest targets at the time period we'll be covering tended to be rock and roll. The other player is Phil Phillips, a preacher from Texas. He has written multiple books including Turmoil in the Toy Box, the focus of this special, a sequel to that, and Saturday Morning Mind Control, and many other books that honestly don't have any sources or citations to the claims he makes about the properties he covers. I won't tell you what he's currently doing quite yet, as I want to save that for the end of this series. Just please don't spoil people in the comments section, okay? That background behind us? Let's start.
Now, I've got a guest today. His name is Phil Phillips. He's from Texas. He has been involved in missions work in his life, and he has now felt called to study the effects of cartoons and children's toys and even TV programs upon our children today.
Maybe he was. I'm not going to say necessarily that he wasn't, but even Solomon, king of Israel, was called to rule justly and slipped into evil, being misled by his own desires. That doesn't mean he hasn't warped his own calling.
Now, Phil, I'll tell you what, 14 years ago, Scooby-Doo was a lot different than what we see today, and I could hardly recognize it. Can you tell me what's going on in this cartoon?
Yes, there's a vast movement toward the occult within the cartoon and toy industry. Most people don't realize that 80% of all cartoons deal directly with the occult, and 40% of the toys on the market have occultic influence, and these are the most popular.
Now, I could easily just dismiss this per Hitchens' razor, but I'm far too much of a jerk to just let it slide by unchallenged. Only 33 shows in the decades of the 80s had what could be loosely defined as that. And let's be generous and assume I missed a few and bump that number up to 40. That's 40 shows out of 236, which is 16% of the cartoons out at the time. Now, I could give you the benefit of the doubt and say that you meant all shows. But you only cover animation in this special, so I won't allow any wiggle room on that. 16% is a far cry from 80%. The only way you could have goofed on this is to honestly mix up shows that had what you claimed with shows that don't. Either way, as a Christian, it is your job to speak the truth, not to make things up as you go.
And I wanted to know, do you feel that there are a lot of children that are being influenced by the cartoons they watch?
Oh yes, take for instance a cartoon like He-Man and Masters of the Universe. It can be seen as many as 31 times a week in an area.
Time to do math again. 31 times in an area. As He-Man's runtime was only 30 minutes, that would put it at about 931 minutes, or approximately 15 hours of He-Man. That means in an entire week, those locations would have to play He-Man for over 2 hours a day, including Sundays. I have yet to find any evidence that He-Man was played that frequently at all. So, again, I highly doubt he's being honest here.
With a viewing audience as much as 16 million children each time it's aired.
It was actually pretty difficult to find the Nielsen ratings for He-Man, but I did find an article from the New York Times concerning She-Ra that states what He-Man's viewership was at the time of the paper's release, which, oddly enough, was around the same time of this special, clocking in at about 2 million, compared to the 16 million Phil here is claiming. So far, he's not showing me that he's done his due diligence here.
And so we're seeing a vast effect on the whole United States and other countries around the world through these cartoons and toys.
Millions of children now watching occultic cartoons and then going out and buying occultic toys. Now, could we say that there is witchcraft and occultic practices that are actually being portrayed in these cartoons?
Oh yes, the witchcraft and occult practices are not make-believe. They're taken from actual witchcraft, actual pagan religions, levitation, mind control, astral projection, and other forms of witchcraft ceremonies are portrayed within the cartoons.
While I have no doubt that witchcraft is a thing, and so are occult beliefs and religions, I don't, even for a moment, believe anything real was shown in Motu. Let's see later if he can back that claim.
How did you get started in exploring all of this? I mean, how did you get into analyzing the toy industry?
Well, it was very unusual. I was in the process of going on the mission field and working my way through that and speaking in different churches. The Lord directed me to go on a 14-day fast. And during this fast, I did something very unusual. I walked into a toy store. And when I walked in the toy store, I was faced with a toy holding an occult symbol in its hand. Now this got my curiosity up, so I purchased the toy, and I read the comic book that was with it, and it was occultic practices within the comic book. So I talked about it in the church I was in that night, but I didn't think much of it. I threw it in the back seat of my car. About 3 days later, I was driving home from these series of services, and the Lord spoke to me about what happens when a child plays with a toy and how they project themselves with their imagination into a toy, and they give it life, character, abilities, talents, and they set the surrounding around the toy.
Now, wait a minute.
Fasting is a regular part of the Christian faith. I have no contention there. However, his seeing what he personally identifies as an occult toy raises some red flags for me. In fact, Deuteronomy 7:25 through 26 states, "The graven images of their gods shall ye burn with fire. Thou shalt not desire the silver or gold that is on them, nor take it unto thee, lest thou be snared therein, for it is an abomination to the Lord thy God. Neither shalt thou bring an abomination into thy house, lest thou be a cursed thing like it, but thou shalt utterly detest it, and thou shalt utterly abhor it, for it is a cursed thing." TLDR, don't buy real occult things. While Skeletor and others may be sorcerers, devil priests, etc., they are starkly fiction, and so are the objects and things they interact with. If Phil's claim is that these toys are indeed demonic, then he has already lost ground from a biblical perspective concerning them, simply by buying them. I will say, though, that he is spot on about how children play with toys, but that's a given.
And the Lord told me that children were being affected by these things and that I was to do something about it, which proceeded in me studying this material over 2.5 years ago.
He may very well have. However, if he did, I frankly believe you went in the wrong direction here, as we'll get into later.
Well, we've seen over the last several years a slow, subtle occultic influence in our cartoons, but it's become so blatant. When do you feel this blatant turn towards the occult and witchcraft really took on its momentum?
Well, there's a cartoon called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Now, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe really broke the ground on this cartoon occultism. In fact, it set so many records. It was turned down by all 3 major networks, by the way. It was the first cartoon to go through independent TV stations as a first-run cartoon.
No. It was turned down by ABC. There's no evidence that it was turned down by any other network.
Well, I think what we should do is let's watch on the screen right now and see an opening to a He-Man series and see some of the occultic overtones as we begin this. We're going to play a little segment here showing the transformation of He-Man.
Power of Grayskull.
Well, now Phil, here we're seeing a transformation of He-Man from a wimp, like a Clark Kent type of character, to the He-Man, and he says something like by the power of Grayskull. Is that correct?
Yes, what you just seen is He-Man being transformed. In fact, his name is Adam.
Yeah.
First man.
Interesting.
Until he's transformed, and then he becomes He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe, by lifting his sword in the air and yelling by the power of Grayskull. Now, to understand this, we have to understand what Grayskull is. It is a castle built by unknown hands in the shape of the skull, and there's a demon spirit living within it that manifests in the shape of a skull. And so our good character is empowered by occultic demon spirits.
You're kidding me. So,
Flatly false. Firstly, the skull spirit he's referring to is from the mini-comics, which came well before the TV series. In the original mini-comic, the spirit of Castle Grayskull just sort of sat around waiting for the future king to unlock the secrets of the castle. In the Filmation series, the power of Grayskull is extremely nebulous. There is no direct avatar for it, and the powers therein are fairly limited. Secondly, in order for something to be a demonic spirit, it has to be a fallen angel. While there is apparently some biblical discussion going on about that right now, that's generally the accepted consensus. For the spirit of Castle Grayskull to be demonic, it has to, in fiction, be a fallen angel. And there is zero evidence to come to that conclusion. Even less so in the cartoon, where He-Man actually even faces down a being that's basically Satan in the series. No matter how you look at it, these statements are incorrect on all counts.
you know, I received this letter. I thought I might read it here. A lady had written to the Eagle's Nest, and she said, "How harmless are the cartoon characters on the Masters of the Universe program for children? My sister-in-law allows her son to watch this television show, and he also has all the characters, He-Man, Skeletor, who you see on the screen right now, and the Castle of Grayskull, to which this little 2-year-old boy repeats from the show, by the power of Grayskull." Here's a little boy repeating, 2 years old, by the power of Grayskull, and she says he holds his hand up, saluted to the sky. So a 2-year-old is actually learning these things.
Well, the Bible says, "Dear children, let nothing take God's place in your hearts."
Right.
And He-Man is being lifted up as a god, and many children are receiving him as such. In fact, I was talking to one lady, and I've heard a number of experiences like this, but she said, my little boy was in the back seat of the car, and a radio preacher came on and said, "Our Lord God, the master of the universe." And her boy jumped from the back seat of the car and said, "Mommy, God isn't master of the universe, He-Man is."
What? A little boy said that He-Man is the master of the universe?
Literally both the things Phil has described here comes down to parenting, not the show itself. By his phrasing, he's implying that the show's purpose is to turn your children away from God to replace him with He-Man. Categorically untrue. If that story about the child in the car is true, that tells me that firstly the child has poor reading comprehension, as He-Man is never stated as the master of the universe himself, and secondly, that the parent wasn't teaching their children about their faith properly. And if we dive deeper via the toys that made us, we see that the Masters of the Universe tagline was a marketing gimmick. The original name for the series was going to be the Lords of Power, which Mattel itself struck down because they didn't want any religious connection, and they thought that name sounded too religious.
Oh, even more so, I've got another one. My dad was talking about my presentation in a church, and a little boy was seen afterwards. I mean, I didn't even do the presentation. And afterwards, he was seen in the parking lot. Now, this is a kid growing up in a Christian home, going to church, Sunday school, the whole shot.
Right.
Out in the parking lot with He-Man in his hand, running around in circles saying, "He-Man has more power than Jesus. He-Man has more power than Jesus."
So we can assume that millions of children that you say watch these programs are having their minds transformed from reading the Word of God or believing what the Bible says to believing what the cartoons are saying. They have that kind of influence on their minds.
Right, they're taking on many gods.
Anecdote isn't often considered evidence for a reason, and more importantly, I'm saddened to hear that your father, as a preacher, wasn't smart enough to put the rod to you over this nonsense back when you began. And you're still blaming the cartoon and projecting intent and guilt to the creators of it because parents in your churches panic at the smallest thing. The Bible says in 1 John 4:18 that there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. These people aren't expressing love, either for their children nor for their fellow man. They're showing panic, which is born of fear. A church that's in a constant state of fear is a church that doesn't connect with God. Keep that in mind.
Well, let's look at what this is spawning in our toy stores. Each cartoon is spawning little toys that represent the cartoon. Is that correct?
Right.
All right, then I'm going to show you a He-Man figure here, and he's got this, what do you call this sword here?
Well, that's the sword of power, but as we've talked about He-Man, he becomes transformed. Now, from He-Man, we need to take a look at Skeletor.
Okay, now this is the He-Man, a muscular figure and so forth that mostly little boys follow, I take it?
Right.
But the little girls have someone too.
Oh, many little girls play with this toy.
Oh, really? Well, let's look at Skeletor now. We've got him up on our screen, and Skeletor is this ugly-looking skeletal creature with a staff in his hand. Now, what's that staff that he's got in his hand?
The staff is a ram's head staff. Now, the ram's head is a very occultic symbol. It's boiled in cauldrons. It's used in different occult practices. But when it's seen on the staff, it's called a Norok. And when the Norok is pictured in occult books, many times it's pictured with the butt of the staff crushed onto the head of a dove. Now, Skeletor introduces most of the occult within the toy series. He has the ability to mind control, to levitate, to astral project, and to do many other occult practices and pagan religion practices.
So, dude, I think you're completely glossing over the fact that Skeletor is a villain. He's the bad guy. He's the character that kids aren't supposed to emulate or like. He's there to be defeated. As a Christian, you should identify and understand that concept. The entire complaint that you are manufacturing here is pointless. And that Norok thing you mentioned earlier, I've found zero mentioning or listing concerning it. And with your established track record here, I'm going to assume you made that up too.
Simply Snake Mountain. I thought I'd get this toy up here if we can get that on the screen. And here's the snake and all. I mean, this is definitely an occultic toy. And it's got an interesting little feature here. I'm going to turn it on. It can actually transform your voice from your regular voice to that of an occultic hero. Is that correct? So let's get a Skeletor type of voice. Let me turn this on here. I think I'm getting it too loud. Skeletor, the master of the universe. Does that give you kind of an example of...
Yeah, you should see the commercial they play with it. You know, it transforms your voice into that of an evil.
So little
voice.
children would actually use that to even identify more with these occultic heroes, right?
Not much commentary on that. I just wanted to make you suffer like I did while cringing through all of that.
You have a great challenge facing you, He-Man. Perhaps the greatest of your life. Have you ever heard of the Star Seed?
I thought it was a myth.
It is no myth. It is real. And it is right here in Eternia. Let me show you in the mirror. Eternia is an unusual planet, for we are located directly in the center of the universe. It was here, where we now stand, that the explosion took place which created the universe billions of years ago. At the very center of our planet, there is a small piece of the energy left from that explosion. The very energy which set the stars burning and the planet spinning. The Star Seed. Speak a thing to the Star Seed and it makes it happen. It can do anything. It is all powerful. For untold ages, the location of the Star Seed was known only to a chosen few of the cosmic enforcers. But its location is no longer a secret. At this very moment, Skeletor is tunneling his way to the center of Eternia. Can you imagine what would happen?
is this possible, Phil, as we're watching this witch talking? She's talking about the creation of the universe, how it was created with a great big explosion, or what some of the scientists would call the Big Bang Theory today, which totally throws out creationism.
No, it doesn't. That's dumb. You're a dummy.
But all of this, I mean, we're seeing such occultic overtones, and this segment we just played was not something we looked for. We just turned on the TV and recorded the first segment we saw. Isn't that correct?
That's right.
Sorry, I don't believe that. You two have been lying throughout this special, and I'm not about to take you at face value this far into the game. And what occultic thing are you referring to? The Star Seed? It's a MacGuffin, an object that drives the plot forward.
Well, I want to get back to exposing some of these characters that we see in the cartoons. So, Phil, would you tell us about the characters we're seeing on the screen right now?
Well, we have a good versus evil here, battle. But the good is empowered by satanic power. This is Tila. They call her the warrior goddess, or the patron saint of all warriors. You notice that she's wearing a cobra head breastplate and has a cobra head staff in her hand. Now, the cobra is the symbol for demonic power and protection.
No, I'm pretty sure it's a symbol for...
And this young lady is involved in witchcraft, and you'll notice that she's a very voluptuous looking thing, and they wear very tightly clad clothes and sometimes even negligee.
No. The worst the women characters and figures ever wore in that series was swimsuit at best. The men literally wore less than them. You don't get to play that card concerning the series about modesty.
This character is called Many Faces. Now, in a cartoon, Many Faces becomes demon-possessed by drinking a magical potion that Skeletor gives him. Now, he is released from that, he becomes a good character, but he still has the demon living within him, and every once in a while it wells up inside and makes him an evil character again. So he crosses back and forth.
You mean little children with a Many Faces toy, now I've got the little Many Faces toy here, can actually see him transform from a demon-possessed skeleton type of creature to a good guy.
And back.
I guess what you do with the toy, if we might try it here, is you can turn this little deal and you can make his face change.
There you go.
And there he becomes a good guy. And then the little child can, there's several faces, the Many Faces in this little toy, which change, but you know, you can become a skeleton creature, and we could go around to the different faces. And this has got to have some kind of a message to the children.
Oh, definitely. It says you can be demon-possessed and still be good.
It wasn't an episode for starters, it was a mini-comic. And in that mini-comic, Many Faces doesn't become possessed, he's mind-controlled by Skeletor. He's actually an actor, and that's why he has multiple faces. The face he's referring to is for his role as a monster, and a monster is not the same thing as a demon. For comparison, Godzilla is a monster, the king of them to be exact. Monsters are physical creatures that don't have supernatural origins normally. Oddly enough, in the comic he's mentioning, Skeletor uses Many Faces to capture Tila in order to sacrifice her to a demon for power. A demon that He-Man literally beats into submission. How odd that he doesn't mention that, isn't it? And no, the point wasn't to show that you can be demon-possessed and still be good. The point was to not judge something or someone by its looks. A lesson you failed to internalize.
This character here is called Stratos. They call him the Winged Lord. He has the ability to fly and to shoot fire from his hands. You'll notice that he's a half man, half bird.
Yeah.
Now this is an inference from the gods of the ancients. They're half men, half beasts. This particular one is the sun god Ra. He's becoming a very popular revival within the toy and cartoon series, as we'll see in some of the other cartoons later on.
We're going back to ancient pagan gods and forming our toys after them.
Right.
Another baseless claim. The human-animal hybrid is also found in the Bible. Don't believe me? Go look up the biblical description of a cherubim.
Well, we're going to take a look at some of the actual occult practices within the cartoon series, and part of the way I do that is to look at the comic books that come with them. This is the PowerPoint Dread. Now in the PowerPoint Dread, we see Skeletor in a classic lotus position of meditation. Legs crossed, palms on the knees, with the palms out. He is levitating off the ground.
In a yoga type position.
Right. He has a power being coming from his head holding a crystal ball. Crystal ball is used in necromancy or communication with the dead.
Right.
And he's talking about that this crystal ball is the only thing that will allow him to focus all of his psychic energies. That's on the first page of one comic book.
And, again, he's the villain. You're not very good at this, are you?
And now?
This one's the Magic Stealer. Now, in the Magic Stealer, Skeletor introduces the power of the pyramid cult. Now, he walks to the center of the pyramid, he sits inside, and he starts to steal the power of Eternia. Now, Eternia is the good world they live in. And these are the powers that rule that good world. This fiery serpent, these fiery skulls, this gargoyle. Do you know what they call these things?
No, what?
The spirits of the air.
Spirit? Well, then that's Ephesians 6:12, isn't
Right.
it? Where we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual power, spiritual wickedness, principalities and powers, spiritual wickedness in heavenly places, the powers of the air.
Or the spirits of the air.
The spirits of the air, and the rulers of darkness of this world. So actually these cartoons are making real what Satan has had for a long time.
I've got two scriptures for you. Exodus 20:16. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Proverbs 6:16 through 19. There are 6 things that the Lord strongly dislikes, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. Bearing false witness is something God hates. And make no mistake, that's what Phil has done here. He claims the spirits shown are of Eternia itself, but they're not. They're projections of Skeletor's own greedy desires. The art makes it very clear that they're coming out of the machine to try and steal the power from Eternia altogether. And He-Man is the one that calls them the spirits of the air. Again, the hero fighting evil. Stop bearing false witness, Phil.
When I was brought up, I watched cartoons like Bugs Bunny, Donald Duck, Daffy Duck, Elmer Fudd, and all of the Looney Tunes. But today, there's a different kind of cartoon that's coming on our TV sets. And the question is there a well-organized plot, an insidious design right now to program and influence the minds of our children towards the occult and witchcraft? We see things like spell books and witches and zones of eternal evil and all kinds of demons in today's cartoons. And we're discussing today with our special guest, Phil Phillips. And Phil, I'd like to welcome you to the program. God bless you.
Any of the cartoons you listed under the tainted microscope wherein you view these cartoons will be damned as evil and occultic as well. But you won't apply your own standards evenly, nor will you look into the actual market forces and legislation that brought all this change on. All you see is that there's a change, you don't like it, so you immediately give the devil credit for it, which in a way is devil worship itself.
Now, in God's economy, children are very important. And I wonder, Phil, if the church is overlooking the children. Do you think this is happening?
Well, in church history, yes. The church has overlooked the children on many occasions. Some people, in trying to put emphasis on the children, have said that children are the church of tomorrow. But that's not a true statement. Children are the church of today. They're an integral part of the body of Christ today. God has placed them within our bodies, and we have to make sure that they are healthy and spiritually alive.
Yes.
You see, children, their relationship to God is as important to God as our relationship to God. And this should motivate us toward ministry to the children.
You're attributing the rise of cartoons and toys in the 80s to demonic influence with no proof for it. And furthermore, I'll put this out there. What is a more effective or likely tactic? A, putting out a bunch of shows that magically program children to reject God, requiring everyone from inventors to market managers to be in on it. Or B, manipulating the ego and calling of a preacher to put forth incorrect assertions not backed by fact, to attack shows that kids love in a dishonest way that'll cause them to view their parents and the church as bullies that want to condemn everything they like. Which one do you think is more likely? Which one do you think would be a more effective strategy for someone with limited power like Satan has to utilize? Which one do you think would drive children out of church quicker and more effectively? I can't say this is a definitive, but from my own experiences with the church of this era and the people that grew up in it, I see more evidence for the latter than I ever have of the former.
Well, now we know that TV has become a babysitter for children. And when parents don't want to take responsibility for children, they send them to sit in front of their TV babysitter. How much time does TV take in the average child's life?
Well, in 1978, there was a study done that said children watched an average of 15,000 hours of television before they graduated from high school, while only spending 11,000 hours in the classroom. In 1984, the same study was done, and the figure is up to 22,000 hours on the average in front of the television set. That's 1,000 hours a year increase. So with that and the 11,000 hours in school, we have 33,000 hours of total input into a child's life before he's 18 years of age.
22,000 hours, and a lot of that is taken up in cartoons. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. In fact, I was watching TV when I was about 2 years old and turned it on, and Lassie went running into a burning barn. And those words came on the screen that we've all come to hate, "to be continued."
Oh, yeah.
And I was crying and very upset by this, and my dad was trying to comfort me and said, "That's not real, that's just fantasy." But
Yeah.
that didn't help because I believed it was real. I could not comprehend fantasy. And so he finally faked a phone call to the TV producers to make sure she was okay, and that took care of it.
And then you thought Lassie was okay because he supposedly called the producer.
Yeah, to make sure.
I left this clip in here for two reasons. Number one, I like listening to people try to condemn TV via hours attributed to it, because now that we're in the age of the internet, it's also very silly. Two, go back and listen to Phil's talk about Lassie. He's not condemning the actions of his father, whom we and he knows as a preacher, for lying. Instead, he's projecting his own childhood issues onto other kids.
So, being that children look at these things as reality, how do they view a commercial?
Well, they view commercials as public service announcements.
As though it's a happening that's really true.
Oh, yeah.
Citation needed.
Medieval fog. Cyclone, use your whirling powers to investigate. Around and around I go. A whirlwind. To side, cyclone. With fist that fly. You can't stop my whole evil army. When cyclone spins, evil never wins.
Cyclone, new from the Masters of the Universe collection. Each toy sold separately from Mattel.
A copter over a Cookie Crisp. It's the Cookie Crisp.
Just checking the traffic.
Cookie Crook, this scheme to get Cookie Crisp isn't taking off.
Who can blame me? It looks like little chocolate chip cookies.
But Cookie Crisp cereal stays crispy in milk, and it's part of this complete breakfast. Well, Cookie Crook, it's time you started a new career.
Yeah, this one's definitely winding down.
If you like cookies.
I let those play because, well, Cookie Crisp is freaking delicious. And I love those old Motu commercials. They're freaking rad. I still can't get the Modulok one out of my head. So, good job, advertisement team.
By the power of Grayskull, and he'll begin to throw spells on people by his own imagination of powers, and really it gets the children looking into the occult for their powers. Is that correct?
Yeah. Creates a taste for the occult.
Oh yes, because there's totally an occultic spell out there that will give someone the ability to push a moon, right? What a joke. This video has gone on pretty long, so we're going to stop right here for now. I want you all to understand that these type of moral panics don't do anyone any good. And to my fellow Christians, please take care in how you conduct your discussions concerning such matters. As the Bible states in Proverbs 18:21, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Well, that's it for the Motu section of Deception of a Generation. I really hoped you all liked it. It's my longest edited video to date. I'd really like to know your thoughts on this series in the comments below. Oddly enough, we're already 1/3 of the way done with the series. That's right, the special itself is 1.5 hours long, and the Motu section takes up almost 30 minutes of it. And next up, as could be expected, is She-Ra. I hope you'll join me for that one too. Special thanks to my patrons Avis and MegaUmi. If you'd like to support my nonsense financially like these two have, feel free to throw money at me via Patreon starting as low as $1. I'm still holding 2 contests right now. First is the Thundercats original fan character contest. The video that outlines the details of that are in the description below. The entry time limit is next Sunday by 12 a.m., so keep them coming. And the main contest is still ongoing as well. First person to comment on my first video after hitting 1,000 subscribers will win a set of the Loyal Subjects Thundercats figures. I also plan on starting to stream art again this Friday, the 28th at 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time because I'm still trying to go to Don Bluth University. Link in the description for that Gofundme. I put out a call for Motu art for the scroll here, but no one sent me any. So I'll just fill that space with the other art that's been sent my way. Links to the artists shown is in the description below. Since I'm covering She-Ra next time, feel free to submit She-Ra art to be featured using the hashtag #LioFeatureMyArt. And this could be any version of She-Ra, the original, the mini comics, the planned 2002 one, even the new one. Just put that hashtag on it on Twitter or Tumblr, or even message me at my social media below. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Take care.